Hello viewers, again it's my privilege to spend time chatting to an academic, and it's kind of you to join me. So tonight we have Stephen Law, who is recently retired as reader in philosophy at a London college and is editor of Think, the Royal Institute of Philosophy's magazine. Stephen, how are you? How the devil are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good. So let's get big pictures. There we go. Now,
Okay.
a couple of weeks ago, I had AC Grayling as a guest on my show, and he was a fantastic guest. And he said some things that, on reviewing them, puzzled me a little bit. So I'm wondering if you would help me to sort them out.
I'll do my best.
I know this might be a bit like mind reading, but well, let's give it a go. So what we have is some clips.
There is a paradox. It's called the paradox of the ravens, which applies to the question of evidence. It's quite interesting. I mean, if I say to you, all ravens are black,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, fine. Then I say, well, that entails, because that's logically equivalent to saying that anything which isn't black is not a raven. So if I can point at anything that is both not black and not a raven, then that confirms my hypothesis that all ravens are black. So I point at my shirt and say, this is white and it's not a raven. So that confirms that all ravens are black. Obviously it seems not to, but logically speaking, it does. So that's what's called the paradox of the ravens.
So that's one of the occasions when logic seems to fall down. But I'd like to mention, now at that point, you might have noticed that I was taking the conversation in a different direction, but AC shook his head. And I'm thinking, what was it he was going to say if I'd allowed him to continue, you know?
Oh, I missed the head shake. I didn't.
Could you not hear what the clip was about?
I could hear it, yes. So he was talking about the paradox of the ravens, wasn't he?
That's right, yes. And I said it was, perhaps it was an indication or an instance where logic falls down. And he shook his head.
Oh, I see. No, I see. That's why. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, listen to my take on this. See if I'd like to hear your opinion of what I think he might have been going on to say. I'm wondering whether he was intending to say, in the case of the fallacy of the raven, we were comparing one observation, his shirt, one observation out of all the possible unlimited observations that could have been made, and pinning that up against the ravens are black, all ravens are black proposition. So it seems to me that what's going on there, and this might be another fallacy, I don't know, as you know, I'm not a philosopher. It seems to me that if an outcome is not correct, it doesn't automatically follow that the contrary to it must be correct. Is that, do you think, where the conversation might have gone on another day?
Maybe. I'm struggling a little bit to know. I'm not quite sure why he brought the paradox of the ravens up. So, I mean, the thing about the paradox of the ravens is it's a paradox generated by two seemingly plausible assumptions about confirmation. So confirmation is the idea that a hypothesis can be confirmed by an observation. And the more observations you make, potentially, the more confirmed your hypothesis might be, to the point where it actually becomes reasonable to believe it. But even one white swan confirms just a little bit that all swans are white. So it's very much a matter of degree, confirmation. And then philosophers will try and sort of pin down what confirmation is and what the principles are that govern our thinking about confirmation. And two very plausible principles are, number one, that generalizations are confirmed by their instances. So, a white swan is an instance of the generalization all swans are white.
Mhm.
So it confirms that generalization, if only a little bit. And then another principle is that if you have two propositions which are logically equivalent, then any observation which confirms one confirms the other one. And then, if you take those two assumptions, you can show that because all swans are white is logically equivalent to anything that's not white is not a swan, or if you prefer the ravens example, all ravens are black is equivalent to anything that's not a raven is not black, then given that observing a non-black non-raven is an instance of confirming all non-ravens are black, it then follows, given the equivalence hypothesis, that non-black non-ravens confirm that all ravens are black. And many people think, but that can't be true. See, the conclusion that you've drawn from these two seemingly plausible principles is incorrect, they say. Observing a white shoe doesn't confirm that all ravens are black.
No.
And then it's a paradox. It's not a, it's a famous paradox in the philosophy of science. Something's got to give, right? You either have to give up one of those two principles, or you have to accept that white shoes confirm that all ravens are black. So what are you going to do? And then the philosophers argue about which of these various, which of the three options it is that we should be taking. I have no idea now, thinking about it, why AC brought this up. But anyway, that's famously the paradox of the ravens. Yeah. So you're not obliged to defend, by the way, the hypothesis that white shoes confirm that all ravens are black. Most people find that highly counterintuitive, but there is a way actually of defending that view. The Bayesians can do it, funny enough.
Yeah.
But let's not get into that, because that's just another massive can of worms. I've already taken up far too much of your time explaining the paradox of the ravens.
Well, I didn't give you the context, but we had been talking about reasons to believe. I think that was the preamble to that part of the show. But my way of thinking about it is that ravens are black is a specific case, whereas an alternative observation that's taken to confirm or refute it is one instance out of an infinitely possible number of instances that could have been picked. That's a sort of, is there any Bayesian element in that?
Well, this is a horribly complicated puzzle. I mean, you could give up one of your two initial starting assumptions. You probably don't want to give up the equivalence claim that, if evidence supports one hypothesis, it supports any hypothesis that's logically equivalent to it. That looks pretty solid, actually. But then you might want to give up the claim that every generalization is confirmed by its instances. You might say, well, that's true of the generalization all ravens are black, but it's not true of other generalizations, such as, all non-black things are non-ravens, for example. And in fact, there are generalizations that are not confirmed by their instances on the face of it. So, for example, all snakes are located outside of Ireland, which is apparently true. The legend goes that it was St. Patrick that banished them from the Isle of Ireland. So anyway, all snakes are located somewhere outside of Ireland. So let's suppose we keep finding snakes and every single one is outside of Ireland. Does that confirm that there are no snakes in Ireland? No, it doesn't. Actually, it makes it more likely that there are going to be snakes in Ireland as well. So on the face of it, there's a generalization that's not confirmed by its instances. So chuck that one out and you've also solved the paradox of the ravens. Because you need that assumption to generate the paradox. So famous puzzle, horribly tricky and difficult. I'm not confident I know the answer to it, but that's what was brought up for whatever reason.
Now, you're a teacher, I think, because not only are you a retired university reader, but you've also written a load of books that, oh look, one of them's green and it it shows transparent on my chroma key technology.
So I always try to write clearly. And there it is. Yeah.
This is the green bit that my computer is sorting out as not there. But you've aimed these and in the same way that your editorship of Think magazine, the Institute of Philosophy's journal, is aimed at a wide audience. Some of these you've deliberately aimed at the children market, haven't you? So
yeah.
So you're in the same business as me in a sense, because I'm a retired science teacher. So our whole aim has been to help youngsters, particularly, become better educated. So
yeah, I've certainly worked on trying to introduce philosophy to young people, and the reason that I did that was because it took me a long time to discover philosophy myself. It wasn't until I was into my 20s. And had I, and once I discovered it, I realized this was what I was passionate about. And in fact, I had a bad time at school. I hadn't even got any A levels because I was kicked out of sixth form college. So it would have been great if there'd have been a book that had, I would have found accessible and engaging, that introduced me to philosophy at a younger age. I would really have appreciated that. And so I decided to write that book. And so that book was published back in 2000. That was The Philosophy Files.
Yes. This is a very foxed copy. It's all going brown at the edges. And it's so long.
Yeah.
So you wrote this for the young version of you, really, didn't you?
Yes, I did. That's exactly what I did. Yeah. And because I've always explained things very often using images, so when I was giving lectures at university, I draw a lot of pictures. I'd naturally tend to think in terms of images, so it was very easy to do an image-filled book. Although I didn't do the images myself, some professional did them. Daniel Postgate.
For our audience, it's full of these cartoons, these little line drawings.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he did a great job.
A lot of your books are like that. They're illustrated in that same sort of way, or several. Some are. Mm. So, are you ready for another AC Grayling clip? Let me see.
I'm not sure I'm being very helpful, but far away then. Okay.
Let me see if I can get this one up.
Yeah.
A falsehood can be a good thing. The classic case is where somebody says, does my bum look big in this? And you say, no, and you're not telling the truth, but it keeps the peace. Okay, so the kind of case where sometimes truth can get in the way. And indeed, of course, sometimes telling the truth can cause harm. So
there's a joke about that. I don't know whether you've heard this. The wife says, does my bum look big in this? And husband says, step back a bit so I can get it all in.
Oh dear, that would be quite the wrong way to go. Okay.
So that was, we were trying to talk about truth and the various types of it. I mean, you can see that I put up a rather contentious statement that it was absolute. And sorry, not absolute, that it was the truth must be relative, which leads us on to consider what the difference is. What's the difference between absolute and relative? As these are words that we bandy about in ordinary conversation, but we tend not to have very accurate definitions of them.
Are you asking me to provide a definition of those terms? You mentioned truth. So is it relative? That's an interesting question. Or is it non-relative and absolute? I think it probably depends on the case that you're looking at. So, for example, if you've ever watched I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, you'll know that they make them eat revolting things, including witchetty grubs, which are native to Australia. You eat them live, big squirming live things. Now, I believe that Katie Price, formerly known as Jordan, glamour model, had to eat one, a witchetty grub, and she said it was worse than childbirth. So clearly she didn't enjoy the experience. So if you were to ask her, Katie, are they delicious? She's definitely going to say no. Whereas if you were to ask somebody else that, perhaps grew up in Australia and it's part of their culture, perhaps to eat that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're very familiar with it. They might go, yeah, I love them. Witchetty grubs, tasty. So you can see then that we might want to say that it's true for one person that witchetty grubs are delicious, but false for another. There's a single claim being made there: witchetty grubs are delicious, and the truth is relative. Is that a terrible thing? Not really. That's okay. And it's clear what's going on here, isn't it? It's that the deliciousness is not an objective feature of the witchetty grub. It's like, people sometimes say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, the deliciousness is very much in the taste buds of the person that eats the witchetty grub. It's not an intrinsic objective feature of the witchetty grub, unlike its mass, say, or some other properties. So there are properties which are out there mind independently. It's just an objective fact that the moon is not made of cheese, no matter how many people might believe that. But if people believe that witchetty grubs are delicious, then that kind of does make it true for them that they are delicious. So there are truths which are, it seems, essentially tied to the subjective and are relative, and then there are other truths which are mind independently true. Most of us would go, yeah, the truth about deliciousness, that's the relative subjective truth. The truth about the moon being made of cheese, or the mass of the witchetty grub, these truths are objective truths, and they're out there independently of us and what we might happen to believe or feel about it or whatever. But then you come to kind of tricky cases like morality, where people are not sure what to say. Is morality merely a reflection of our own subjective preferences and tastes, or is it an objective, mind-independent fact that murder is morally wrong? And there you find, people having a debate.
Yes, indeed. Well, yeah. Coming from my, retired science teacher background, I tend to think that there are these personal truths, like, for me, I prefer coffee without sugar. That's one of my personal preferences. That's my truth for me. But it's trivial because it's just to do with me. It's a subjective opinion. Whereas there are out there, you mentioned the moon is not made of cream cheese or any colored cheese. Out there, there's the sort of universe's truth, which is beyond dispute in a lot of cases, hopefully. So that's not trivial. And those are the sorts of truths that we would love to be absolute, but even those aren't, because although we desire that certainty, we've never been able to observe it. I mean, we desire there to be an absolute zero to temperature. I did this with the AC, but we haven't been able to observe it. We can't. It doesn't exist out in the universe. The background radiation temperature is 3 degrees above absolute zero, and it can't make it in the lab because we cannot remove all sources of heat, which would mean a total vacuum, and not even walls to the container, because they could be emitting heat. and if neutrinos go through, which we can't stop, then they're going to leave a trail of heat. So absolute zero is a theoretical concept. So, and the same applies to the speed of light.
How does this relate to truth?
Well, because I'm trying to say that in the wider...
What's the claim that we're considering? Sorry, what's the claim that we're considering, which is
in the wider scheme of things, if you forget the conceit of humanity, thinking that they are the center of the universe, and you look objectively at the universe as a whole, there is no absolute truth.
Well, yeah. So you're making an analogy with absolute zero and absolute truth, and you're saying there's no absolute zero. Is that true? I have no idea. But let's suppose it is. And in the same way, then,
what I'm saying is, we can hypothesize that there is an absolute zero, and we can hypothesize that there is an absolute speed to light, for example, but neither of those things have been observed. We've got close to them.
No one's actually drilled it. No one's actually drilled into the moon to check whether there's any cheese in there either. But nevertheless, I'm going to say we can be very confident indeed that there's no cheese in there. I think what we need to do, maybe this will help, I don't know, it might make things worse, is we need to separate out the issue of whether or not truth is absolute or relative, whether truth is whether things are mind independently true, or whether the truth of a proposition somehow depends on how things strike us subjectively or whatever. There's that question, which is a very interesting one. So we had a little think about that. But I think that what you've done now actually is you've changed to a different question, which is the question of what we can be certain about. Right? Can we be certain that these things are there? And of course, this is contentious. I mean, some people think that you can't really know anything about the universe outside of your own mind. They're skeptics about the external world. And Descartes, although he wasn't a skeptic, famously runs a sort of argument involving an evil demon that might be deceiving him into, to kind of conjure up these very radical doubts about whether there's a world out there at all. And we can entertain, matrix type scenarios in which, I don't even have a body. I just think I do. I'm actually a brain in a vat, or like, yeah. So you can raise those kind of questions about the world around us, and and then there's the question of whether we can prove things with 100%, confidence, certainty. Even if we can know about the world around us, can we truly be certain? And the answer to that question depends on what you mean by certainty. I mean, yeah. If we're after proof, well, that's a very slippery term. You can prove things beyond all possible doubt. Well, there are probably not that many things you can prove beyond all possible doubt. So there's always an element of uncertainty. But if you go into a court of law, they talk about proof, but there it's proof beyond reasonable doubt. And that we believe we can achieve. And so why couldn't we prove beyond reasonable doubt facts about the world outside of our own minds? I think we probably can. I think we've proven beyond any reasonable doubt that the moon is not made of cheese, despite the possibility that we'll go there one day and drill in and it's camembert just below the dusty surface. So I think that we've moved on to a different question, really, which is the extent to which we can know or be certain about things. Right. And that's a different question to the question of whether or not a truth is relative or not. So I'm doing what philosophers do to the irritation of almost everybody, which is I'm just separating things out very carefully, separating out the questions, separating out the concepts. which people often find very tedious. But unless you do that, you're going to end up very confused. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So you talked about certainty, but surely for certainty we need absoluteness, don't we? Or we can't have certainty.
I don't know what you mean by that. What do you mean? We need absoluteness. Why do you want certainty, but you're not going to get it when it comes to an awful lot of things. You can just establish perhaps beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, what do you mean by certainty? 100% certain, no possibility of error?
Well,
you can't be certain I'm here.
If there's an element of doubt, then you don't have certainty. And that's what I mean by absoluteness.
Okay, well, that's a way of using certainty. Yeah, I mean, that's what Descartes meant. He wanted absolute certainty, no possibility of error. There are very few things about which we can be certain in that sense. Descartes thought he found one such thing, that he exists, because in doubting, you demonstrate that you exist. So it's a kind of self-defeating doubt. There's something about which you can be certain. But then other philosophers questioned even whether that's certain. So certainly, if we're going to require for knowledge certainty, boy, you ain't going to know much.
No.
But we don't require that. I mean, that's a ludicrously high place to set your bar, so far as knowledge is concerned, that you have to be absolutely certain there must be no possibility of error. Of course, I mean, that's not normally what we require for knowledge, nor should we.
No. So what we have then is a sliding scale, and there is a position on this sliding scale where we decide that's acceptable.
Where it becomes reasonable to believe something. Yeah. Your confidence increases to the point where you can say, actually, you know what, I think that's true. And then your confidence might increase still further. Yes. But there will still be the possibility of error. It's always in the background for most beliefs. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you can't have reasonable belief, that you can't indeed prove things beyond reasonable doubt. I think we can.
In the courts, they have two standards, don't they? In the lower courts, it's one standard, and in the higher court, it's the other standard. It's proven beyond reasonable doubt when you have a jury. And then in the magistrate's court, there's a different criterion, which is much less stringent. I can't remember what the legal phrase is right now.
No, I don't know, I'm afraid.
So I noticed that you've been tweeting today.
I can't remember what I tweeted. Some nonsense. Some political rants, possibly.
See if I can get this up before we talk about.
You're going to make me think about my own tweets. That's cruel. Don't do that.
Why has that drop down come? Here you are. Now, I don't know whether I can get this big enough to be seen. So I click on that and then this, and then I make, can you read that? I think we can, can't we?
Yeah, just about. Yes. I tweeted.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I quote, if there's no God, morality is subjective preference, end of quote. That's a thing you sometimes hear theists say.
Yes.
And to which I've responded, but morality is tied up with human flourishing, brackets, otherwise what's the point of it, end brackets. What helps humans flourish is, even scientifically investigable, a matter of objective fact and not necessarily a matter of indulging our subjective preferences. So I just stuck that up there. I mean, it's just a tweet. It's just to get people thinking, right? In this case, to get people thinking about this fairly common refrain that you get from religious people, that in the absence of God, morality boils down to mere subjective taste or preference. It's not at all clear to me that that's true, and I'm just expressing some doubts about it.
They do love that, though, don't they? I mean, Penn of Penn and Teller has said something along the lines of, according to theists, I should be out there raping and pillaging or murdering. But I'll assure you that I do as much raping and murdering as I want, which is none. So
yeah, he's a... Carry on.
He's a wise man. So you've introduced the ideas of objective and subjective in that tweet. So my concept of objectivity is something that hasn't been tainted by a mind. It's not had a bias imposed upon it on the way through a brain. Now, is that possible?
Well, things are objectively out there, mind independently. I'm assuming, because I'm not I'm not some sort of idealist or, I think the world exists mind independently. So, I believe that there are objective facts out there. But then there's a question about, our knowledge of those facts and the extent to which our perceptual mechanisms and prior beliefs and so on shape and colour the window that we have on that reality. So, to what extent can we trust it? To what extent can we consider it reliable? There's no doubt that we are prone to various cognitive biases. We know this for a fact. And so, you have to be very careful. And it's good to know about those biases so you can try and be on your guard against them. So, we are imperfect mechanisms. We, when it comes to trying to establish how things are around us, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it. And in fact, we're pretty good now, having developed the scientific method at dealing with the effects of our own cognitive biases. We've developed tools that allow us to detect when those biases are operating and that allow us to try and bypass them to some extent. So if you're pointing out that we inevitably are biased and we have our biases, it's true. But I'm not going to become Mr. Super Skeptic because of that.
No. Well, I would contend that it's probably impossible to get perfect objectivity. And what the scientific method does is attempts to get round that by insisting upon repeatability and shareability of the observations that are made. And the more such confirming observations, the bigger the, shall I go back to using that word certainty again, bigger closer to objectivity we get.
Yeah, that sounds roughly right. You want to be doing you don't just want to be looking for confirmatory instances. No, you want to actually also be as
that would be a bias in itself.
Yeah, that's not necessarily the right way to go. You want to actually trying to test it and look for counterexamples and so on. That's really what you need to be doing very often. So so we've developed this toolkit, the scientific method, which enhances our ability to find out about the world around us by, to some extent, neutralizing those biases to which we are otherwise horribly prone.
Yes, trying to cancel them out. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So here's a question from one of our audience. This is, there you go. Do philosophers see a great value in probability and statistics regarding reality estimates? That sounds a bit like Bayes coming in here again.
Yeah, they do, of course. Yes, The Bayesian approach is very popular with philosophers at the moment. You find loads of Bayesians and applying Bayes' theorem to this or that or whatever it may happen to be. And indeed, it looks like you can possibly solve some philosophical paradoxes, for example, by adopting a Bayesian solution. So including the paradox of the ravens, funnily enough. So yes, the answer is yes. Philosophers are very interested in probability. And that's my answer.
Well, that's a pretty good answer. So perhaps for the benefit of our audience, we ought to explain what we're talking about when we use Bayes' theorem, Bayes' idea.
Oh God! Don't ask me to explain Bayesianism in any detail. It's
taking into account of prior knowledge.
It's a bit more to it than that. It's Bayesianism in a nutshell. Well, there's a theorem, Bayes' theorem, which says that you should revise the probability that you've assigned a hypothesis depending on new evidence, new observations that you make in a particular way, according to the formula. And that involves, the formula says that the probability of your hypothesis is going to equal the probability that you previously gave it multiplied by the probability of the new evidence over I can't even remember Bayes' theorem now. The probability of the new evidence, given the hypothesis over the prior probability of the evidence. That's what it is. Christ, it's so long since I taught this stuff. And if you apply Bayes' theorem in that way, you can see how you ought to, according to Bayesians, how you ought to rationally adjust your beliefs in response to the new evidence that comes in, how you should adjust the probabilities that you're assigning hypotheses. That's it in a nutshell. That's a Bayesian approach.
Excellent. Well, we've got some more questions coming in here. And an explanation for us. We were unable to think. Yes, here's Steve Cook is providing us the two levels of making decisions in court. It's criminal law is beyond reasonable doubt. Civil law is the balance of probabilities, which is a lower standard. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot. Right, here's a bit of philosophical history requirement. Are the Enlightenment philosophers under attack in modern politics? I'm frowning. I don't understand that.
Are the Enlightenment philosophers under attack in modern politics? Well, what is Enlightenment? You find it characterized in different ways. I kind of like Kant's attempt to define it. Usually Kant was a windbag, and he would be very, very complicated and difficult to follow when he tried to explain things. But actually, on this one occasion, he more or less nailed it. He said Enlightenment is about basically applying your own intelligence and thinking for yourself, making your own judgments, and not relying on tradition and authority.
Yes.
Sapere, the slogan of the Enlightenment, he said, is sapere aude, dare to think, dare to question. Don't just passively accept what you are told by those in positions of authority, tradition, and so on. And so this was particularly a threat, of course, to religious authority and tradition. Once you start encouraging people to start thinking for themselves and not just passively accept what they're told by authority and tradition, you can see that religion is potentially in big trouble.
Yes.
And so a lot of religious people bashed the Enlightenment, and to this day continue to bash the Enlightenment, actually. Other people are big fans. Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now, wrote that book. He thinks that the spirit of the Enlightenment has improved our lives immensely. It has allowed things like science to flourish properly and so on. I am a big fan of Enlightenment in the sense that I think that it is really important that individuals be encouraged to think and make up their own minds and not just passively accept what they're told about, in particular things like morality,
I think
politics,
right.
and so, why would that value be under attack in modern politics is how I might interpret this question.
Because we have a lot of would-be dictators out there, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, are they encouraging, politicians, are they encouraging people to just rely on authority and tradition, to defer, not to make their own judgments, but just to accept what other people tell them? I'm not sure that's true. In fact, I'm sure they would say, you know what, you should think for yourselves and look at this evidence that I've got here and so on. And so I don't think that they are discouraging people to think and question and so on. Not officially. I mean, in what way are they a threat to the Enlightenment? Well, maybe in other ways. Possibly they want to erase the idea of there being any kind of objective truth. According to some thinkers, that's what's going on in modern politics.
Yeah.
There's your truth, there's my truth, but the idea that there's any kind of objective truth that's there independently of us. Certainly, you're being encouraged to question whether we can have any grip on it. We could come to know it in any way, and under those circumstances, then, well, every opinion is as good as every other.
Yes.
And as valid as every other. And are politicians exploiting that kind of thought and that kind of depressing skepticism? And possibly they are. Maybe that's what's going on.
I think the Facebook user has in mind people like Kellyanne Conway, who came up with the expression alternative facts when she
there
was
you go.
actually from.
Yes, you've got your facts and I've got my facts. Yes. Yeah. So, yep. Yeah. I think we've answered this question now, haven't we?
I think we've given it a good going.
Yeah, the idea of there being no objective truth, but there are many truths, there are many, there's your facts, there's my facts, and so on. But either there is no objective fact of the matter, or if there is, it's behind a veil and we'll never know it. That kind of thought, it certainly has been exploited a little bit. Yeah.
Bring back critical thinking, I say. So here we have Russ, who is asking, I know why this has come up, because Russ and I have conversations about this, because I'm a constructor. I think that maths is invented, and this is not necessarily a general view, because a lot of particularly theists like to think that maths is out there to be discovered and God put it there. But that's
not just theists, mathematicians often think that.
Including
they're mathematical Platonists. They think there's a kind of mathematical heaven, and they're exploring how things stand in that strange non-natural realm.
Including Roger Penrose, I'm amazed to discover in a recent interview. Yes. Yeah. So Russ wants you to address this question. Do you think, John?
I'm not going to. I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to answer it both. I'm not going to commit on this one, but I will set out I'll set out what I think the issues are. So
you're going to stay on the fence.
I am, annoyingly. Yeah, I'm going to do that. But so here's the thing. Yeah, mathematicians often think of mathematics as describing how things stand in some kind of external or natural realm. Yeah. That's kind of a realist view on which the facts are there mined independently. Or you can be kind of an anti-realist about mathematics and think that really maths is just a kind of a system of conventions that we have adopted, and that a proposition is true just because it follows from the axioms that we laid down, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And so John, you're saying you're very much in the latter camp.
I am.
Now, so there's a problem that at least one problem that you face depending on which camp you're in. So if you're in the or it describes a realm out there, mind-independent realm, then famously there's the problem of how on earth we get to know about this strange landscape of mathematics, because we certainly don't see it using our ordinary senses. These mathematical objects and so on, then you're not going to trip over one in the street. So given that our senses tie us up to external reality by means of causal mechanisms, this realm seems to transcend the spatio-temporal universe and everything that's going on in it causally. So how on earth could we come to know about it? And famously, Socrates in Plato's Meno solves that problem by suggesting that before you were born, you were acquainted with these.
It was injected.
No, you actually experienced this mathematical realm for yourself in a non-physical realm, and so you're able to now sort of dimly recollect with a bit of prompting. How things stand in that external reality. So you could go that route, but most realists would say instead that you have a kind of faculty of intuition, mathematical intuition, that plugs you into this external reality, and it's by means of that you're able to know the mathematical facts. But that's a very mysterious thing, isn't it, that faculty? And a lot of people are going to be raising an eyebrow at this point. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we just supposed that maths is just a kind of a system of conventions that we've constructed, because then there's no problem about knowing that things are true, because it's just a matter of knowing what our conventions are and what we've laid down and so on, what follows from that. So you can get around the kind of epistemological problem by bringing it in-house, mathematics, but then you have the alternative problem that it doesn't seem to be merely a matter of convention, the mathematical truth. There are many different systems of mathematics that you could develop. You could use maths to build a bridge, or you could use schmaths to build a bridge, a different set of conventions on which 12 times 12 is not 144, it's 147, and so on. Now, if you use schmaths to build the bridge, it'll fall down quite possibly. Whereas if you use maths, everything's fine, right? So it seems that mathematics does somehow accurately map how things are in the world in a way that schmaths and other alternative mathematics that we might construct do not. That seems to suggest that it's not merely a matter of convention, mathematical truth. And so people get pulled in these two different directions depending on what they're worried about at the time.
Yes.
And now my answer is I don't know. I don't know the answer to this puzzle. That's just because I'm a philosopher doesn't mean I know all the answers.
No. That would be a wild claim to make. So you mentioned intuition, and I'm not impressed, I'm afraid, because I can think off the top of my head of at least two cases where intuition was wrong. And of course, quite a lot of things are counterintuitive. Things we've discovered have turned out.
Intuition. To the extent that we're relying on intuition, we're relying on something with a somewhat suspect track record, aren't we? And philosophers very often do appeal to intuition, interestingly. But that's not really what the word intuition means when it's appealed to by a mathematical realist. So what you're talking about there is, well, it just really seems that way to me. In my gut says it's this intuition. That's my feeling about it. Whereas no, they mean it's not just that you might happen to feel that way, that 2 + 2 = 4. No, you have this faculty. There's a connection, like sight, which connects me up via light bouncing off objects and hitting my retina and sending off a cascade of activity in my nervous system and so on. So there is similarly some kind of faculty, but not a physical, natural faculty, that allows me to detect the mathematical facts, and that's what they're calling intuition. It does seem a bit spooky and weird, doesn't it? Yeah.
Also in your tweet, you mentioned morality, and I agree with you in that it is very much linked with human, and the success of a social species, and those are criteria that can be measured. I mean, we know that the human species is successful because there's 9 billion of us. Is it 9 now? We're on the way to 9.
Oh dear.
Certainly 8 billion at the moment. And we know that we're successful because we've conquered pretty much all the different habitats available to us, including, to an extent, space and the moon. And so I would contend that morality itself is not a very useful word. I want to do away with the word morality. I want to talk in terms of successful social behaviors, actions that facilitate the growth and dominance of mankind, in our case, or any other animal kind in their case. And so I would say that the reason we've evolved to not kill each other as a general rule is because that would be...
We do kill each other quite often, though, don't we? I mean,
Well,
we have wars and...
Well, yeah. Let me expound on this a little bit more first, because it would be counter to our biological mission to kill everybody in sight. Now, granted, there have been very serious attempts to eradicate large populations, but despite that, the population trend has been of growth. So the principle stands with a few dips in the graph,
Have you got a question for me?
Well, no, I think we're...
Or do you just want me to comment on what you've said?
Please comment.
You're saying that let's stop talking about morality, let's start talking about what helps human beings flourish, succeed. I suppose I have a little bit of sympathy with that. I mean, I do think that whatever morality is, there is some kind of essential link to human flourishing. To the extent that, if there was a moral system that was completely antithetical to human flourishing, well, it wouldn't truly be moral, would it? I mean, it's got to fit at least with human flourishing. There is a kind of an essential or conceptual link there, even if there's more to morality than just promoting human flourishing. It seems that there's a minimum standard that you've got to meet so far as a decent moral system is concerned when it comes to human flourishing. So I have some sympathy with that thought. Obviously, it's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it. I don't think. If we just abandoned the concept of morality and just focused on, well, let's just do what we can to improve human flourishing. Let's talk about that. What's the downside to that? I'm sure there is one, but off the top of my head, I can't think of what it is. It's kind of an interesting question, yeah.
Well, maybe on another occasion I'll invite you to join me and we'll focus on morality, and I'll make a little presentation, and you'll have thought of it by then, and we can have a conversation about.
Yeah, I mean obviously it depends what you mean by human flourishing. I mean, critics of the suggestion that morality is essentially tied up to human flourishing, they're going to say, well, yeah, but what is human flourishing? What do you mean by human flourishing? And so on. Is someone that's led a very content life exploiting other people, well, they've flourished, and surely that's a good thing. And what's wrong with that?
Well, there you see, you're focusing on the idea of the individual, whereas
Yes.
I'm thinking in terms of the population.
Okay, so it's overall human flourishing.
It's a social behaviour.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's a worry. My brain is finally getting into gear. Finally. So here's a worry that you might raise. You might say, what if we could maximize human flourishing by murdering that old lady over there. I don't know, harvesting her organs, say, or, you know, the usual counterexamples to utilitarianism. We can wheel those out. It may be that now we have to start thinking, what do we mean by human flourishing? And okay, so we've got various, you know, many more content individuals who are going out and leading their lives and having loving relationships and have projects that they enjoy and improving the lives. So plenty of flourishing going on, but we just murdered somebody in order to achieve that flourishing. So clearly there's a bit more to morality than just promoting flourishing, because we just did something that's morally wrong, despite the fact that it...
I see where you're coming from, but I want to extrapolate from the general principle, because all societies, it's a moral universal that killing is wrong. Killing a human is wrong. No anthropologist has found a society that doesn't think that, in principle.
Yeah.
So
well, with a few refinements, but yeah.
So I want to extend that in terms of causing bodily harm to a person involves the risk of killing them. Therefore, that is also taboo to us in our inherited behavior.
Yeah. Where are you going with this thought? Well, you tell me. Go on.
Well, I don't know. I think this lends it.
You're providing a sort of a naturalistic evolutionary story, aren't you, about why we have the moral responses and intuitions, if you like, that we do. You're explaining them. Yes.
Yeah. I'm giving an evolutionary explanation for morality, if you like. Yes. Yeah. So.
Okay, but now how does that relate to what we were talking about, human flourishing?
Well, the human flourishing is empirically measurable aspect of this socially successful behavior.
Yes, so clearly by having a moral system and acting in accordance with it, at least a moral system of the sort that we do, it has enhanced human flourishing, you might argue,
as a species.
Yes.
Again, you've got to take in the broad view. This has got to be not a telescopic view, but a blunderbuss view, and then the thesis fits. But the trouble with humanity is we're all egocentric. We all think.
What if I don't know. Suppose there's a tribe that develops a morality which is extremely aggressive and brutal when it comes to outsiders. Now, that tribe, as a result of its having this morality, becomes incredibly successful in taking over and dominating other parts of the globe, to the point where this is the dominant moral system. Now, you might say, well, that's a thumbs up for human flourishing then. But it's not, is it? Because previously, before this tribe came along, there could have been very happy, healthy societies that were very, very much flourishing. And now we have something completely different, incredibly oppressive and so on. So it seems to me that just because it helps human beings survive and reproduce and indeed take over territory, it doesn't follow from that it promotes human flourishing. In fact, that could be an impediment to human flourishing.
Right. So you're saying that compassion doesn't necessarily provide the outcome that flourishing requires.
Well, I don't know what I'm going. I was. Well, you're talking about giving an evolutionary account of why we have the moral values that we do, and then but you also want to say that morality is very much tied up to human flourishing. But it seems to me that the evolutionary story might the process might result in a system of morality which is extremely successful when it comes to getting human beings across the face of the planet in large numbers, which seems to be what you were focused on right at the beginning, but actually really a horrific impediment to human flourishing.
Yes, yes, because of its brutality, successful brutality.
Yeah. So I'm just teasing out these different bits of what you said because they don't necessarily fit together terribly well, it seems to me. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. At least I'm not sure why they should fit together very well, and they may not. Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be helpful, but probably just sounds like I'm being nitpicky.
Here's a Facebook user making your point here. Look, Japanese samurai society where killing was considered highly moral.
I know nothing about Japanese samurai society, so I can't comment on that. But there certainly have been moral systems in societies that very brutal indeed, particularly to outsiders.
Yeah.
That's really not uncommon, is it? And those systems will help those individuals spread across the face of the earth, dominate, and their numbers maximized, which is what you were measuring as a sort of, you were equating that to human flourishing. But I don't want to equate that to human flourishing because it seems to me that actually could involve the eradication of human flourishing. It could just be steamrolling over human flourishing. So I don't want to, I guess one of the points I'm making is I don't want to equate human flourishing with getting humans to reproduce very effectively across the face of the earth. That's not the same thing at all.
So we're coming to the end of our time here because I try not to inflict more than an hour on my victims because I'm sure they've got a nice glass of wine or something waiting for them at the end of this show. So I think we're going to have to agree that morality is an intractable problem, like this Facebook user suggests. What could we do about it? It's what is there that anybody could do about it?
Okay. Well, I think that's largely it's an empirical question, isn't it? We need to do some research. One thing you probably don't want to do is ask an armchair theorizer, which is what I am. So I'm not well placed to answer those kind of questions. But it's a really good question. I'm just not particularly well placed to answer it.
No.
In part, it's you need to be asking psychologists and sociologists and so on.
Yeah, that's the trouble with the really good questions. They don't have really good answers.
No, they may have really great answers. They're just I'm not particularly well placed to provide that answer.
We haven't found them yet. I think
I'll happily speculate for hours.
I think you've frozen, Stephen. I think technology has defeated us here. So, in case Stephen doesn't unfreeze, I'd like to announce that next week we have Kevin Quantum, magician, who currently is appearing on Britain's Got Talent. That should be fun. And the week following that, we have Kat Arney, who is the regular co-host of The Naked Scientists. That's a BBC radio program. And she is also the host of BBC Radio 5's Live Science show. I think Stephen has finally, his connection's broken. So I'll thank him very much for appearing and wish him a pleasant evening. And also thank you to you for watching. And I hope to see you again next week.